My name is Chelsea Sluyk. I'm the program coordinator at the Center for Teaching and Learning here at the university, and I am particularly interested in this panel. I was sitting where you were not too long ago, 2 years ago. I did the MAPH program, and I did some adjuncting afterwards, which I loved. So I know where you guys are kind of coming from. We're gonna I'm thinking of covering 3 main points while we're here. What is this job like? Is it something that I would want to do? I have a feeling many of you are still in the consideration phase. Then secondly, how do I get this job? And then thirdly, how would it fit into a larger career trajectory? So we're very fortunate to have this great panel. They all have very diverse experiences, come from different kinds of institutions, and also a lot of experience, both teaching themselves and within the hiring process, and also working with training and working with teachers and supervising them. So they are a wealth of knowledge on all these subjects. We can just kind of all go left to right. We'll start with Jason Evans. He teaches Teaching in the Community College course here for the master's in the master's program in the Humanities, which some of you may know. He graduated from MAF in 2002, and that fall began teaching basic writing as an adjunct professor in Ohio. Since 2003, Jason's been teaching English and basic writing as a full-time English professor at Prairie State College. He's currently the chair of the English department there. He's also working on his PhD right now in English, studying composition and race at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and on a national teaching research project called Global Skills for College Competition, which aims to improve student success in basic skills courses in community colleges. So he's got his hand in a lot of pots, but that's great. So Robert Lagueux, he earned his PhD in music history from Yale in 2004, and he's been teaching for 7 years at Columbia College, or this is his 7th year there. He's the founder director of the first-year seminar program there, and he directs its teaching academy. He also teaches medieval literature in the English department there, and he leads our junior faculty seminars and our teaching consultants pedagogical training sessions at the Center for Teaching and Learning. So we know him well. Maurine Stein she also teaches, she's teaching for the first year in the Teaching in the Community College course, also for the MAF program. She's a professor of humanities and coordinator of the honors program at Prairie State College. She's worked there for more than 30 years. She is a U of C alum as well. She received her BA, MA, and PhD from here in general studies in the humanities and community on social thought, respectively. As a professor, she has team taught quite a few classes with colleagues in the English department. She's been on a number of search committees and tenure committees, and is the secretary of the Faculty Federation, and has participated in contract negotiations. So she could speak on a lot of parts of the life of an instructor at a school like Prairie State College. Sheldon Walcher. He's an assistant professor in the Literature and Languages program at Roosevelt University, as well as the director of composition and director of the graduate credentials in teaching of writing program there at Roosevelt. He earned his PhD in rhetoric and composition at the composition and at the University of Utah in 2007. He taught at the University of Tennessee and served as director of composition at University of Southern Mississippi before coming to Roosevelt in 2010. Before that, he earned an MFA in creative writing from Penn State, and he spent 3 years as an adjunct himself, and then full-time instructor at a number of schools in Utah. So that is our panelist. I'm gonna start us off, I think, by asking a question of all of you, and you can kind of each take a turn answering that. And then I wanna open it up. I have a few more questions I could ask, or we could just get you started if you guys are full of questions. So for those at step 1 that I mentioned, at the considering phase, is this something I want to get into? What is it like? What is something that often surprises people? What is something, a common mistake people make, or something they don't really know about the profession would be a good place to start. So I'll kick it off with Jason. You want to start?
Okay, great. Rob and I were chatting just beforehand, and we thought that somebody should mention fairly early on the pay for adjunct faculty. It's kind of a weird note to start on, but it's important, especially if you have student loans that will be coming due. So it's not it is not a lucrative profession, not even kind of, it's just not, to adjunct. You said the figure that you gave was $1,200 for a 15-week course?
For a first-time instructor at Columbia College, something like that, yeah.
Okay. At Prairie State, it's something like $1,500 or $1,800. And the city colleges is around $2,000. But in any case, a rather small amount of money.
How many courses do you teach?
So as an adjunct professor, one would teach like no more than 3 at a school. And often to make ends meet, people will teach at 2 different schools. So maybe like 5 or 6 classes. So do your back of the envelope math there. But in terms of like a positive sort of, what surprised you? I think as a graduate student, I thought I had a poor sense of reality and thought that I would be able to get a job, like lickety-split. And this is in like 2002 when the job market wasn't so terrible. And I found that like I would send my application off and I would be all excited and then I would not hear anything ever again. So I think I found that surprising just as a sort of personal experience coming out of graduate school and entering a job market.
I mean, there's a number of different things one could add. I would say that one thing to sort of be prepared for is, and maybe you all know this, but the very real situation of last-minute hiring, wherein adjuncts get hired, somewhere between 2 hours before the start of the class and, maybe a couple of weeks. I mean, this really does happen. It's terrible, but, an instructor drops out and all of a sudden someone needs someone to cover a course of whatever that might be. That appeals to some people. That is less appealing to others, but I think that's a very real aspect of the situation. The other thing I think is the degree to which one must essentially kind of like hustle for work. It's not enough, I think, to just, the first step is to send out CVs, resumes, cover letters to the chairpersons of departments in which you might wish to teach. But I think there's a really there's a lot to be said for sort of following up in regular, non-pushy ways. Are there things still out there? Because, I know that I see a lot of resumes just sort of come in, and I'm very grateful for them, and they go into manila folders, essentially, whether virtual or actual manila folders. And it's important, I think, to sort of have a sense of a relationship with someone, even if I've never actually met them in person, just sort of having some sort of vaguely regular email exchange once a semester, twice a semester, saying, hey, just think of me if anything comes up, I think it seems incredibly mundane, but I think it's important. The last thing I'll say right now before sort of passing things along is the importance of documenting your teaching, both for yourself and for hiring committees or hiring individuals who might be looking for instructors. Recording what you do in the classroom, I'm talking about keeping like a little kind of journal, like a Microsoft Word document that you spend, 3 to 5 minutes writing in after each class about what worked and what didn't, is an incredibly efficient and useful way of figuring out how to tweak courses that you've designed or how you might modify courses that you've essentially been handed. It's a really useful way. You will forget almost everything you do in a class if you don't write it down. You'll never remember all of it. And then so it's useful for you, but it's especially important for hiring committees, whether someone looking for an adjunct or for a full-time faculty member, that people don't want you to just say, of course, I'm a really good teacher, I'm really dedicated to students. It's important to have evidence of that, whether that's syllabi you've created, exams you've created, activities you tried that didn't work, things you've attempted, creating some sort of, even if it's not fully organized, teaching portfolio, or at least starting to assemble the raw material for one, is a really important thing and something that you'll never be able to recreate after the fact. It's important to sort of very steadily and regularly do it. It's almost effortless if you do it a little bit at a time, and it pays off huge dividends down the road.
I think that's extremely good advice. I don't know when I figured it out, but I have by now. And it helps enormously the next time you teach to go back and look at what you did and build on it. I'm trying to remember what really surprised me when I started teaching at a community college. And I think it was the student load. In other words, the number of students that I needed to pay attention to, the class size and the number of classes, because I started with 15 hours with a full load. I didn't know that it was possible, and I was just putting one foot in front of the other and just walking into my house at the end and collapsing and then getting up and doing it again. And finding strategies for how to pay attention to classes of 30, at that time 38 students, and give them some kind of possibly individual attention. And structure my time so that by the end of, several hours of teaching in one day, I still could do it. And that still takes a lot of strategy on my part. Ways of giving myself a little downtime during one of the classes, whether it's having the students write a little bit and then doing it a different class another day, something so that I'm not on, hours and hours and hours. So there's things like that that I had never experienced from the other side. I had been in schools where, I don't know, you couldn't tell, the classes were a bit smaller, and I just hadn't been in that situation before and wasn't aware of it. So that's something that surprised me.
Well, you've covered some great points. I would just say, for my case, and you heard a little bit from my bio, I sort of have a strange career trajectory, and I think I was naive getting out of my MFA program about how to hustle and put a career together. So I sort of fell into thing after thing after thing, and it's only with hindsight that I can sort of see how these choices amounted to a kind of strategy, right? So I think it's really great that you're already here and thinking. I mean, that shows the difference of the profession too, about how ahead of time you can think about choices. So I was naive and surprised that my choice to go to a community college would lead to this other thing, and sort of like only in hindsight can I put it back together. I was surprised at how much I loved teaching community college students. I don't teach at a community college now. I was trained in big, sort of 4-year, land grant institutions when I got to the community college, and then returned to, sort of southern Mississippi, which has a very diverse population, and then Roosevelt, to have such a diverse group of students where I felt like every day I really made a difference in their lives. I mean, yes, the pay is horrible. The workload is outstanding, right? It's incredible, but the kind of rewards that I felt personally, because I consider myself a teacher first and foremost, were, sort of amazing. So I love the work that I do and the work that I do with students, and I think I was surprised that, going from like Penn State, where I taught students who sort of were turf grass management majors, to Roosevelt, where I teach students who are the first in their family ever to go to college, and they're barely scraping by to go, and they're working 3 jobs, and they're committed to social justice. I mean, I have learned so much from them, so I think that kind of profound impact they've had on me was super surprising.
All right. So is anyone ready to ask questions, or should I ask another one? All right. Yeah, in the back. Let me, you know what? I'm going to grab that and kind of just bring it to you. I think that's the best way. Okay. Are we live? We are.
Hi. So I have a PhD from the English department here, and my question is twofold, but the 2 parts are related. So here, students use Interfolio for their academic applications. So you upload all sorts of job application materials. And my question is, how do you tailor that portfolio to speak to a community college hiring committee? Because I think the impediment for somebody coming from the University of Chicago when applying for a community college job will be that people will think you're just going to use them as a jumping board and move on. So I'd like to know what's the most important piece from the portfolio. For instance, is it the letter of interest, or Is it the teaching portfolio? Should one send the whole portfolio at one time, including the recommendations and everything, or just send the letter of interest first and then wait for a response before sending more materials? And what exactly would you like to see, for instance, in a teaching portfolio for a community college? I have, for instance, a lot of experience in teaching writing composition, so I imagine that I will not be sending, a syllabus for the sonnet in the 19th century for a community college. But if you could just give us a few pointers about really tailoring that that portfolio to a community college hiring committee. Thank you.
I can give a little bit of an answer, and that is that when I've been on search committees, the most important thing, assuming that the resume is up to minimal standards, is the cover letter. It makes an immediate impression on me and my colleagues, and in the cover letter, one of the perhaps the most important thing is that the writer shows that he or she understands what a community college is, and therefore what kind of job they are expressing interest in. And that's crucial.
Well, to put that in a slightly different way, don't talk about your research. In the 4-year academic job market, one talks pretty much only about research, but that's like the kiss of death for community college applications, because it shows, as you say, this person has no idea what we do here, what we value, and what community colleges value is good teaching. So going on and on about your arcane research interests would, get you put in the do not read pile rather quickly.
I think also too, like I'm assuming you're talking about a full-time position, right, or a tenure track position. So I think talking about community and your involvement in service, whenever I was at the community college and smaller schools, I mean, being involved in sort of service and committee work is important. Showing that you're kind of invested in the students obviously is super important. So like when you're thinking about those moves in the letter and that what happens when that research move pulls out, I mean, I think the thing that gets put back in there is like sort of any kind of volunteer experiences that you've had, you're interested in working with diverse students, any experiences you've had working with students with sort of, different kinds of backgrounds and sort of socioeconomic issues. I think that would be really important for a reader.
Let's jump off of that and talk a little bit about who can apply for a full-time position, who might be a good candidate for that, and if those are some are interested in adjuncting, is there a way to kind of foray that into a full-time position eventually, or can you develop skills there and apply elsewhere, or how does that maybe work at your institutions, and what kind of might a career trajectory look like for master's students and then for PhD students too?
Well, I can speak for Roosevelt. I mean, I think there's a big divide between adjuncts and full-timers. Because, and I think that's a mistake that some people make, is that they think if they get their foot in the door, at least at a place like Roosevelt, that they can build a career there. And it's just the competition is too fierce. We have a unionized adjunct faculty where seniority matters. And once you kind of, whether or not it's true, I think among my faculty at least, there's an impression that if you've been adjuncting there for a few years, you've lost your heat, right? You're not quite as sexy as somebody who's just kind of coming out somehow. So I think it's really unfortunate, but I think a lot of people get, when they make that choice to adjunct, it can lead to just more adjunct work. And I think it's, I think we've moved to hiring some full-time instructors in our program. We had 5 of them, and of those 5, we hired in theory 2 adjuncts, but they'd only been adjuncting a semester. The other 3 were outside candidates, and I just feel like that's a big difference. So for somebody, an outside candidate applying for a full-time position, I think for us, again, it would be really important that you understand something about the social justice mission of the institution. I mean, this is basic stuff, right? Understand the context in your audience and try to talk in terms of as if you were already a part of the faculty and that you were knowledgeable about the kinds of classes that we offer and the kinds of classes that we don't offer. I think that's really important.
And are most of your full-time faculty people who hold PhDs?
Of the 5, we have 1 who has a master's and the rest have PhDs. But I have to say too that, like, I wasn't in the process of hiring those people. They were hired before I got there, but we're in the process of interviewing and hiring another person. And you have to think carefully about, well, what kind of commitment is this person making to this position, and are they going to be happy for a long time? I think there's a disconnect in my own faculty between thinking that this is a full-time gig that we want somebody to be at for the rest of their career, and me thinking, who wants to stay here beyond 5 years? Like, this is a job, at least full-time at Roosevelt, which is teaching a 4-4 load and probably making in the 40s. And that's just not a career move that I could see a lot of the people who take that job wanting to keep forever. So for me, it's like, well, how can we hire somebody to get them groomed and ready for the next part of their career, as opposed to having somebody who would stay there for a long time.
And how might it work so that was at Roosevelt University. How might it work at a community college? Do one of you want to speak to that?
A little bit differently. Go ahead, Maureen.
Jason has done a lot more hiring has hired adjunct, and so he can speak to this maybe more directly. But on the search committees that I've been on for full-time people, there's certainly no feeling that because somebody has been an adjunct that puts them at a disadvantage at all. Really what matters is a combination of an interview and a teaching demonstration. And the fact that they have been adjuncting, if anything, gives them, what I would call sort of a longer interview. You know more about them, you know who they are, and they might very well be, the person that you would prefer, not because they've been an adjunct, but you have more chance to have made an impression on the people that are deciding who to hire.
Yeah, I think that's true. Unfortunately, there's no sense of if you put 2 years in or 3 years in, then you have a nice, easy exit ramp into a full-time position. It just doesn't. There's no guarantee. That said, I think low pay notwithstanding, I think it's a career worth taking a risk on. If you like teaching and if you find the social justice mission of community college attractive, then it's great. It's really wonderful. I love the students, and I love doing it. But the question about how does adjuncting then lead to full-time tenure track work? I think Sheldon had it right. After 3 or so years, the heat or something, the new car smell is gone, and somehow it often. You learn of people who have been teaching for 5 or more years as adjuncts, and they just are perpetually looking for positions and not getting them. So my advice to new MAFers, let's say, coming out of graduate school, is to try it if you can afford it for a few years, and then after 2 years or so, start looking for some other career option. That doesn't mean you have to stop teaching, doesn't mean you have to stop adjuncting. It just means that at a certain point, it'll be a good thing for you, probably as a human being, not to continue to try to do the community college teaching thing. Does that sound harsh?
It's good. I'm glad you're being very honest. I think that's what we all want to hear. Let's see. Are there any other questions right now? Yeah.
Hello, so I'm a biology PhD. Do you have any sense of the difference between science teaching at a community college versus the English department, and is the hiring process in any way different? Just those kind of questions.
I don't think the hiring process is terribly different. I think the same kinds of ways to present yourself would hold true. I do think, just anecdotally, that the job market would be better. Simply because people with degrees in science can get jobs in other places. For instance, I know that when we were looking for a physicist or something, there were maybe 5 applicants, and they had to go hunting for a chemist. It wasn't like they had 100 applications like we do in English. Yeah.
I'll say, I think at Columbia, and I imagine at similar institutions, I think you it's maybe even more incumbent on you to make the case as to why you'd want to be at a place like Columbia College, or say where you're not going to get a lab and a huge startup budget and, you know, hordes of graduate students to assist you. And so I think it really does become a case where the cover letter has to, this is a little corny, but sort of tell a story about why you would want to be there. Mm-hmm. I will also say that although I think it seems really axiomatic and probably obvious that your cover letter should be clearly tailored to the job you're applying for, I'm here to tell you that many, many are not. And that if you can even start to do that, you are in many ways way ahead of the game from a lot of people. I think it's understood that people tend to have a kind of boilerplate cover letter, or maybe two boilerplate cover letters, you know, one with the teaching paragraph first and one with the research paragraph first. It's perfectly okay to have a boilerplate cover letter, but it shouldn't be obvious to me when I read it that it's a boilerplate cover letter. And it's probably not enough to have a insert paragraph where I talk about your institution from, you know, 5 minutes on the website sort of thing. So I think that that's where the cover letter becomes really, really crucial to, so that it's not, there isn't the sense that, well, this person either wouldn't fit in or this person will be looking to leave immediately.
Another question?
Oh. How do you sort of get your foot in the door? I think that would be kind of like if you're first time and you're just like, well, this seems interesting, but it's like, how do you go about applying for these jobs?
I think it was Rob, your point, or Sheldon, I forget. Anyway, contact the chair. Find out like who does the actual hiring for a part-time position, and then contact that person directly. Many websites will have you apply through the HR office, and you should do that. That's good. But like in the city colleges of Chicago, the community college system within the city, I've never heard of anybody getting a position by applying through their central office website. I don't know what happens to the applications. Whereas if you contact the chair directly and kind of make nice in the ways that Rob was talking about, then that's a good way to get your foot in the door. Kind of make yourself a known quantity in that way.
Did you have a?
Sorry, this might not actually be very related, but if you have any experience or you're looking to get into teaching English as a second language, is that kind of are there separate teaching positions for that, or is it just, you know, a nice background to have for teaching composition and rhetoric in general? Or is it not a factor at all? Like, is it not valued?
Well, I mean, at Roosevelt and many schools, we have an English language program that's a separate ESL program. And in terms of compositionists, if somebody has any kind of, you know, ESL background, that's very interesting to us. I don't know that I've ever shared someone directly with the ELP program, though, even though they're just one floor down, right? So you would want to apply to multiple departments in the same institution, I think. And I want to second, too, what you said about timing. I mean, we put the schedule together, for example, for next month. I will staff, you know, beginning that month, all of the sections for the fall. So people who contact me in the early summer saying, do you have any need? I will say no, we have no need, because all of my full-timers have been scheduled. And at my institution, we have a lot of pressure to keep the numbers of sections we're putting on the schedule down for cost cuttings, right? The week before classes start is when I'm scrambling always to find someone to teach a class. And even if I have them in a folder, if somebody has sent me an email or a very nice phone call, you know, like a month before classes start and then the week before classes start, suddenly a problem gets solved for me and I didn't have to do a lot of work, right? It was just kind of there. So I really think that sense of timing is really important. And we have been in that situation too, where an instructor doesn't show up to teach their first class, and in the first week of class, I'm suddenly trying to staff a section. So I think, you know, sort of being aware of the rhythms of the hiring, the realities of the staffing process can help. Yeah.
Related to the application process, is there anything that people can be doing to prepare now to gain certain skills to, you know, that will look good on your CV, or that will, you know, give you the kind of experience that you guys are looking for when hiring?
So I think some people will disagree with me on this, but I am always happy to see anything on a CV or resume that indicates some sort of interest in getting more practice at or bettering oneself as a teacher, even if it's outside of a higher educational context. I'm interested in people who are, I don't know, teaching ukulele on the side to students, or who are doing some sort of tutoring program or whatever, or who can document that they attended faculty development workshops of one kind or another. Any sort of pattern of that suggests to me a pattern of someone being interested in thinking genuinely and reflectively about their teaching, which to me is a big plus. So I think any sort of practice you can acquire about that goes a long way.
All right, I'm coming to you.
I think I went to community college just for only one summer while I was in high school, so I don't remember what's really taught there. And I was wondering if you can just mention what sort of things that we would think of as subjects at the University of Chicago or other elite institutions that just would not be taught in a community college. I know that's kind of a hard question because you have to think also what was it, you could learn here. But I think there's lots of subjects that might be not so relevant to a lot of people, students at community colleges.
Well, one thing that I found surprising for myself, I didn't think I would like to teach writing or composition or anything like that. I thought I wanted to teach like 20th century literature is what I wrote my master's thesis on. And I found out there are no courses, for instance, in 20th century literature. There are literature survey classes. There are opportunities to teach literature within writing classes. But by and large, what we do in say, an English department is teach people either how to become a good enough writer so they can get into the freshman writing classes, or we teach them their freshman writing classes, which is like basics of academic writing and introduction to the research essay at most schools. And then in their sophomore year, students will sometimes take in English a literature survey class. But in general, it's like intro to biology or intro to comparative religions or something like that. The classes are all general education classes, the kinds of things that typical state schools and state systems require for students in their first 2 years of college.
There's a good side to that, just occurred to me to mention, and that is that although in this kind of limited curriculum, one is likely to be teaching the same course over and over and over again, and sometimes several sections at once, the courses are so broad and fundamental in what they address that for somebody who likes to teach, it's never boring.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly learning both how to teach better and something about what you're teaching because it's so broad. So that's the good part.
Along the same lines, would you as teachers in the English department hire somebody who's not from an English background? Like I do Slavic languages and literatures. I'd be interested in teaching composition and writing, but I'm not coming from an English background.
Unfortunately, yeah, in theory, yes. Legally, I think discipline, colleges have to hire faculty with discipline, with 18 graduate credit hours in the discipline. So at Prairie State, we say something, or English or a closely related discipline. So you might be able to convince a dean that Slavic is a closely related discipline, and an enlightened dean might go along with that. But somebody who doesn't have any inkling of what the humanities are might not. But that's like a higher learning commission kind of accreditation issue. When the accreditors come and look at faculty transcripts, they want to see certain things.
I don't think that's true at a place like Roosevelt. For one, it's a private institution. Secondly, I'm in a department of literature and languages. So we have a lot of adjuncts teaching literature and language when we don't have any specialists, right? So that kind of like, what I think it requires though is for you to rethink, and this I think speaks to your point, have you taken any linguistics classes? Have you ever taken classes in translation? Have you taught classes in translation, right? Where you can sort of talk about working with students in sort of teaching them language arts without having a specific sort of bent to it, you know, like how can you generalize your experience to kind of make up that 18 hours. I also think volunteering at a writing center, I know we haven't talked about that, but anyone who has any experience with writing center work goes to the top of my list. And I think that's a really smart way to make up for any kind of deficiency in the sense that maybe you haven't taught composition before, but you volunteered at a writing center or a community literacy center or a high school. I think that can really make up for that because it shows that you're really committed to literacy practices in a community environment, and I think that's important.
So more than one of you has mentioned the social justice aspect of the community college, and I'm interested in hearing about that as a motivation within the institution, sort of where that hits the practical decisions that are being made, and how that changes the character then from a research university or even a liberal arts college. Because you'll hear people talk about social justice there too, but I'm hearing something more institutional in the way that you guys are speaking. So could you speak a little more to that?
Sure. I mean, somebody has mentioned already, first generation college students attending community colleges. The average age at Prairie State is 29 years of age. So it's like this moment in someone's life often where they are thinking of escaping the gravity of their class, or the gravity of their class as kind of brought upon them by their education, their family's education. So in other words, we're about to help somebody up an economic rung, or that's what we tell ourselves. So that's kind of, I don't know, we're a cheap institution to attend. We're taxpayer funded. We can kind of think of ourselves in that way, in a serious way, and that notion of helping people who would otherwise work in a job they wouldn't like and not be paid very well, helping those kinds of people is something that really animates and motivates a lot of people who work within the community college.
And I would just say Roosevelt was founded in 1946 as a social justice institution. It's part of the mission statement. So it's, like being able to, now you ask any faculty there and they have a different definition of social justice, which is interesting, but so being able to think about sort of the betterment of society, progressive education. I also think it changes how we look at, I don't want to generalize too much, but I have known many faculty in the past who believe that it's the student's responsibility for getting it or not. And if they don't get it, then they probably don't deserve to be here. You don't know anyone like that, right? And that is not the basic assumption at a place like Roosevelt. It's what can we do to change the pedagogy to meet where the students where they are, and if we're failing in some way, we as an institution should think about ways to change. So I think that's a really different orientation, and probably something that I never would have thought about unless I'd had that community college experience and sort of faced it on a day-to-day basis and had to rethink my assumptions about learning, and privilege and access and hard work and all of those things. There's a lot of cultural capital that my students at Roosevelt just don't have, that students at other institutions do as a matter of course. And so I think that requires that you think about sort of why that's the case, and also then what can you do in 15 weeks, 30 weeks, 45 weeks to try to address some of those kinds of inequalities of experience that people bring with them.
I'm in the political science PhD program. I was wondering if, generally speaking, who sets the curriculum? So when we're putting our applications together, do we want to put it to emphasize that our ability to observe an orthodox curriculum set by the department, or do we want to show differently that we have some kind of clear vision for a certain kind of pedagogy and content for our own curriculum, or is it somewhere in between?
That's a great question.
I would say both. I think there's it's rare to be in any faculty position anywhere where you teach only ever what you want and only ever the way you want to teach it. So a certain degree of indicating that you can be at least mildly compliant or something, can be really useful. And, you know, because most adjuncts are not going to get hired to say, we would like you to develop and teach a course on 20th century literature or something like that, and it starts tomorrow. You know, you're going to get, if you're lucky, a call or an email that says, we need someone to teach Freshman Comp 1, and here's the boilerplate syllabus. At the same time, I think showing some degree of interest in and proficiency in devising courses of your own indicates, if done well, indicates, you know, some real engagement in thinking about how learning occurs. So that when I see a sample syllabus that's really not a syllabus, it's just a reading list that happens to have weak numbers, you know, down the left-hand column, that suggests to me that someone has started, isn't the kind of faculty member that I would want to hire in the sense of thinking about student learning more about rather than teacher teaching. So I think you want to play both sides of that insofar as you can.
I wanted to ask, not knowing a lot about community colleges, what is a full-time job there like? And if you know that you like teaching, but not necessarily what sort of institution you want to be at, what are sort of the best and worst parts of doing it at a community college?
One of the best things is that you're valued for your teaching. That probably is the best thing. That's what everybody's looking for, is how well you're teaching and how well you're, how unburned out you are, you know, how much you feel like you're doing something interesting and important, how much you respect and like students, and they like you, and so on. So, and that's not true necessarily at a research institution. Worst for me is student load. How many students? For me, that's the hardest part. But that can vary.
I would say for me, I think I would agree with Maurine's highlight. As an English teacher, I've not felt as if student load was overwhelming. I think it is smaller. English teachers at Prairie State anyway get to teach fewer courses and so fewer students. I think it's kind of my own fault if I've created some kind of assignment that I hate to read, or if I realize that I didn't give them enough latitude, so I end up getting 50 of the same thing, then I hate myself and I hate my job. But I also kind of recognize that that's my own fault. Like had I designed this assignment better, I would be happier right now on Sunday night.
And you'll get the chance too.
And I'll get the chance. That is a nice thing. So it's kind of yeah.
Well, before we let everybody go, do you have one last piece of advice, something you would want to leave with them, something that we haven't covered that you feel like people need to know before they jump in? Sure.
Sorry, but I'm going to ask you I'm not supposed to ask you, but that is, what's the pay range in terms of seniority? What's the highest you can get at a community college with tenure, let's say? Thank you.
The highest currently, unlike say our salary schedule, the highest is in like the low six figures. And the first cell, which is like if you're brand new and have an MA, it's arranged by education and years of experience. So if you're in the cell 1, it's something like $45,000, and that's probably roughly consistent for Illinois anyway, from the 40s to like the low 100,000s for people who have been there for a while and have doctorates.
Any last kernels?
Well, I would think about, I think it's really important to think about what you want to do next, right? Not just, 2 years from now, but 5 years and tenures. I think I was actually lucky when I mentioned in the beginning that I did my MFA work in Pennsylvania and then I moved to Utah. And suddenly I was a different kind of teacher and candidate when I had taken that East Coast experience to the West Coast. I think we see a lot of people in Chicago. There are a lot of people here. There are a lot of schools. There are a lot of PhD people with PhDs. There are a lot of masters people. The competition is fierce. There are hundreds and hundreds of adjuncts at every institution. So I would think too about like how much are you geographically bound, and do you want to take that experience to someplace else? I tell my own students this. Look, I don't know how successful you'll be in getting a community college job leaving Roosevelt University with a master's degree. Have you thought about going to Wisconsin? Have you thought about going to Ohio? Have you thought about going to Arkansas? Have you thought about, because suddenly that experience looks really different. If you're in Chicago competing with other people from Chicago for a limited number of jobs, it's too hard, I think. I would think about whether, and that will of course then change the trajectory of your career, but I think would be my best piece of advice. Not to discourage you from applying to Roosevelt, apply to Roosevelt. I hope to see you, but I just feel like the numbers work against you given the kind of economics here. It's better to think about moving someplace small. Sometimes the shortest distance between 2 points actually isn't a straight line. It's going someplace else and then coming back.
Before we thank our presenters, I want to put in a plug for the CTL. The Center for Teaching and Learning, we're located on the first floor of Gates Blake, and we have workshops and seminars on things like course design, creating assignments, even like becoming comfortable in front of a classroom. So do take advantage of our services, teaching.uchicago.edu. You can find out more about us there. And thank you very much to our presenters. If we can give them a round of applause.